Hello, everyone. This is Susan Nash, AAPG, and welcome to week 18. I can't believe it's that many weeks now, but it's great, of our series, Pivoting During the Pandemic, Diversification Strategies, New Revenue Opportunities. We're looking today at the big picture. And so what we really mean by the big picture is we're looking at across the board things like the personal protection equipment, open subsurface data universe, patents, and even the idea of maybe Python being dangerous. At any rate, we have a great group today, and I'd like to introduce you to Sanjiv, Bhaskar, Frost and Sullivan, Stephen Whitley and Raj Kannan, Schlumberger, John Pantano, and Alec Walker. And also I'd like to, as usual, welcome Larry Davis, and he's our good friend and professor at Texas A&M Texarkana, former dean of the Business College. So Larry, welcome.
Good to see you. Sorry I missed last week. I'd like to welcome everyone. Looking forward to the presentations tonight. They're always exciting and informative.
Well, that's great. So we'll go ahead and get started. Our first presenter is Sanjiv Bhaskar of Frost and Sullivan, and he's going to talk today about pivoting to personal protection equipment and exactly what that has entailed. So welcome, Sanjiv, and I'd like to invite you to share your screen. Perfect.
I believe he's muted.
Yes, you're muted, Sanjiv, if you don't mind unmuting.
Oh, my bad. Always happens. So, good evening, everybody. You must be wondering, what is a PPE guy doing at AAPG's session? And it's interesting that when I was asked to present, I thought, yes, oil and gas industry is a very big user of PPE. So it would be interesting to share some of the thoughts and what is happening in this marketplace for PPE. So in terms of PPE, what we cover in terms of PPE is what we call head-to-toe coverage. That includes all the product categories we have here, like above the neck, which includes your helmets, eye protection and hearing protection, and then respiratory protection, which is on everyone's lips or face these days. When we go out, everyone is wearing a mask. And the entire, the whole 9 yards of PPE is what we cover. And so I wanted to share some of our findings with you, what we have been looking at in the past. We've been covering the PPE for the last over 15 years at Frost and Sullivan. So pretty global view we do have on this. Looking at what did the pandemic do for the whole world as such. So what it did is typically PPE coverage is in industrial and healthcare. These are two very separate industries requiring separate coverage, separate product categories, and so on. But the COVID-19 has given rise to what we are looking at now, a consumer PPE segment. That is what people on the street are wearing. There are over 70 countries which have made it mandatory to wear a mask. That used to be the case in Japan, China, and some other parts of Asia. But now globally, in a lot of countries, I wouldn't say most countries, but in a lot of countries, wearing a mask has become almost mandatory. You cannot do anything without it. So what it is doing, it is giving a lot of opportunities for PPE manufacturers to come up with new applications, new products, and the demand has gone through the roof. If I may give an example, gloves, for example, about between 70 to 80% of disposable gloves are made in Malaysia. It's a very interesting concentration of a product category. the manufacturers there used to be able to supply you gloves within 2 or 3 months of your order. But now the backlog is gone to between 12 to 18 months. So that is what COVID-19 has done to the global PPE industry. So what are the kind of impacts we have seen on different industries? So here in the red side are the industry which have been very severely impacted, and no guesses there. Tourism and leisure, aerospace industry, mobility industry has been very heavily impacted. And because of some of these industries, our own oil and gas industry has been very severely impacted in a very negative way. And combine that with the oil price wars, which have been raging, and oil and gas industry is at this time going through some real tough times. And which are the industries which are having a positive impact from COVID-19? Transformational health industry, where we also count the PPE as a part of this area. Those are that industry, these industries are feeling the pleasure of, so to say, I would. To give you an idea, so PPE industry is not very humongous industry in terms of revenue, but it's a very critical industry in terms of keeping the workers safe, keeping the workforce safe. That, I think, is basically the lesson which we've all have seen over the time. But looking at this now, because of COVID-19, what is happening is that the industrial PP segment is supposed to be shrinking a little bit, between 3 to 5%. But look at the healthcare segment of the PP industry, it is going through the roof. Now, staying focused, for example, on the industrial segment of PPE, if I would say, what specific segments of the industry are getting impacted, and what is the impact on the usage of PPE across the board? So some industries, if you can see, a lot of red arrows here, very few green arrows. That sort of gives us an idea that what is the state of the overall industry and what is the state of PPE consumption in these industries. Not that people have stopped using PPE, not that the industries don't care for the safety of the workers. They do all of those things. But what is happening is that the industries themselves have slowed down. In fact, I was looking at the GDP drop in a number of countries the other day, and almost all major economies have seen a drop in their GDP in this period. So that obviously is also impacting the industry like the PP industry. If we look at, once again, the usage of PP products in different industries, there are just 3 industry segments which consume almost every form of PPE what you can think of. So there are 3: construction, oil and gas, and mining. That obviously indicates the kind of hazards or the level of hazards which are faced in these industries. In terms of oil and gas industry, if we look at that, oil and gas industry has 2 major product categories which are very heavily used in the oil and gas industry: protective clothing and protective footwear. Footwear are, in fact, a lot of rigger boots, boots which protect the toes and metatarsals, and protective clothing, especially in the oil and gas industry. Chemical protection and FR garments are very heavily utilized. Gives an indication on what is happening in this industry and logically what we would be expecting in this industry in the next 3 or 4 years from between this time. COVID-19 in between has impacted, so these numbers would obviously sort of see some change. In terms of which parts of the world are using what quantum of PPE products, so North America has a lion's share, and Central and South America. So America is, for example, almost about 35, 38%. Europe is a small number. CIS and the Middle East is once again a big user of, and Australasia. So this sort of the distribution of PPE, you would say, is following, keeping track with whatever is happening in the oil and gas industry as well. So what is happening in the industrial PPE segment? E-commerce is growing, distribution industry is witnessing more change, but PPE industry is looking at a lot of alliances and partnerships. In fact, surprisingly, we have seen a lot of oil and gas companies, oil companies, companies that are producing raw material like PP and different other forms of polymers. They are paying attention to the PP industry as well. And of course, usage of PPE, of course, is obviously is increasing in a variety of industries. In fact, one industry which has come up fairly aggressively in this period is the industry of desanitization, decontamination, sanitization and decontamination industry, which has started using PPE a lot more. So I think with this, I would just sum up with the final words that what are the key takeaways? Healthcare industry is seeing a huge surge in demand. Consumer PPE is really developing very well. Domestic production, almost every country, manufacturers in every country are seeking domestic production now. The governments are wanting their companies to start producing domestically and not depend on single source like China or Malaysia or a variety of those. Strategic stockpiles are taking place for in every country. As once the COVID-19 blows over, the next phase will be strategic stockpiles. And smart and wearable PPE is coming, which sort of helps increase the worker safety. So these are some of the things which we are seeing as a research company. And I finish my presentation here. And in case there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer.
Well, great. Thank you very much. Why don't we save all of our questions to the end, and we can put all the things together at that point. So if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type it in the chat box or the Q&A box as well. So I like the big picture, and interesting to see how there are different ways that people are diversifying while staying in the business. And I'm very interested in our next two speakers. We're really privileged to be able to talk about the Open Subsurface Data Universe, OSDU. So I'd like to welcome Stephen Whitley and Raj Kannan of Schlumberger. So,
thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. So what we're going to present is an introduction, or Raj is going to present is an introduction to OSDU. The technology in this area has been developed, going on for about 5 years. It's really focused around digital transformation. The OSDU initiative was formalized about 2 years ago, and it's had some large contributions. It's an interesting thing because it's been focused on digital transformation. The impact of COVID has been a bit neutral and maybe a bit positive. I hate to say that, but where a lot of other initiatives in oil and gas have to be reduced, the industry itself has recognized that we needed to transform. Right? And this is an area that's been supporting that. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to hand it over to Raj. So Raj and I both come from Schlumberger, but we wear an OSDU hat, a formal OSDU hat. And Raj Kannan actually leads all the open source development in OSDU. So Raj, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the introduction, Stephen, and thanks for the opportunity, Susan, to come and talk to the AAPG team here. So let me maybe start off by giving you a bit of context on why we started this initiative. What are the current realities, if you will, that we are trying to address? So like Stephen mentioned, a lot of companies that were looking at digital transformation, when you're looking at how to derive insights from data and the reliability of data itself becomes a bottleneck a lot of times. So we started looking at what are some of the things that is plaguing the industry in the space. And we said, look, let's look at where is the data today. Data is locked in applications. These are, proprietary formats, and you're constantly moving the data back and forth between the various applications. And so when data gets siloed into these applications, even though you're able to, export and import and sort of get your job done, what you really miss is the lineage, the provenance. What happened to data as it went through the different users of the different applications? And if you look at it from a knowledge perspective, it is all of that context that is really sort of lost every time you cross that application or silo boundary, if you will. And so if you don't have that context, and if you don't have the metadata, so if the metadata is not associated with the data, then effectively what you're really working with is just the raw bits and bytes of the information, as opposed to the full context in which things were used. And on top of it, when you have these silos, then the ability to even discover, data tends to hide in these corners, if you will. So how do you then enable a way to discover the data? Not just discover the data, but discover the relevant data for the workflow that you're trying to use. And likewise, the moment you think about data silos and loss of context, what that means is when you're trying to train machine learning applications, what you really need to give it is not just the final result or some curated data that may be in a master or a corporate database, but all of the information, all of the variants that were produced, and why did a team pick option A or scenario B or decision X versus the other. And so if you're really looking at data-driven applications, driving AI, ML type of workflows, these situation is not really helping, right? So far too much time is wasted on trying to find the data. Workflows are too narrow and do not cover a broad spectrum. So in the past, the approach to some of this would be, data standards and maybe formats and things like that. And what we try to do here is to take a different approach and say, this is something that is not going to be solved just by a standards body. It's not going to be solved by just the operators. It's not going to be solved just by the ISVs. So what you really need is an industry-wide consortium that can take the energy industry at large and say, hey, let's collaborate together in the development of this foundation. And let's look at what is the differentiation that we can provide on a unified data platform, rather than trying to compete or differentiate with data formats and data structures themselves. So it started out with Shell doing the initial contribution, and there were a few early members that came and joined this consortium. And Schlumberger, we joined this, I want to say about 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago. What we decided to do was we were coming at it at the same angle that, a lot of time is really being spent in the data space, that we really need to start to move up the value chain. So it made sense for us to take the code that we'd been working in the cloud space under our Delphi initiative and donate that to the consortium, right? So Shell made a contribution, Schlumberger made a contribution, and that sort of opened the floodgates to a lot of the other people. There's contributions that's coming in from INT, from Google, from Amazon, from Microsoft, from Blue Air, from Emerson, Energistics, and so on. So I'm probably going to miss a few names here. As you can see, the number of the companies that are now working in the industry consortium, the last time I checked, it was very close to 160 different companies, right? And what I tried to do was to do a broad classification here as the operators, the effective consumers and beneficiaries of this technology, if you will, on the left column, and the sort of suppliers. And here again, for lack of space in the slides, I couldn't put all the icons in here. And of course, there are standards bodies, there are universities, that are over and beyond what you see here in terms of the total number of contributors into it. So what that really does is it creates this melting pot of ideas that are coming in from the various people, and therefore we're able to segment the concerns and bring the right SMEs to address the right problem, if you will. So for example, anything that is related to the infrastructure, how can we provide scalability, how can we provide performance, how can we provide security, etc. Those are things that the cloud providers, the horizontal technology providers are bringing in. Anything with respect to the data platform itself and how this can help the applications, those are things that the ISVs are able to bring in. The universities are looking at more innovative things like, ontologies and taxonomies and semantic searches and capabilities that we can overlay on top of it. And of course, the operators are driving, where is the real value add here and what direction we need to take from a standards perspective. So overall, it's been working very, very well with all of these different players in the space. So maybe just to drill down a little bit more and tell you what the data platform is. It's an industry first open source data platform. So you may have seen other initiatives where maybe there are data formats that are published, maybe there are some usage rules that are published, or maybe there are some APIs that are published, or even there is a collaboration for people to share ideas. This is really taking it to the next level in terms of full-fledged open source, just like you would find in cloud native foundation type of initiatives. And therefore, what it does is, nobody really owns and drives the code. It's truly a community initiative, and you can see, we're looking at reference architectures and implementations across pretty much all of the dominant cloud providers in the marketplace today. And the way we are building this is to use standards. So, there are APIs, there are microservices, everything is self-contained. And what this allows us to do is, Blue Air is a company that was looking at seismic. INT was a company that was looking at spatial data. So now everybody, it doesn't matter what the size of your company is or what your competency is, you can start to contribute on the platform. You can build these microservices, you can release those microservices, and you can integrate it with the rest of the ecosystem through the APIs. And I mentioned energistics, but we also have PPDM. So the typical standards bodies that you are aware of in the energy vertical, they're all now part of OSDU, right? So they are seeing the momentum here and they want to get benefited from it. So now what we're doing is we're trying to absorb those capabilities, those benefits that have come from the years of development of these standards into the OSDU platform, bringing down the friction, if you will, to be able to bring data in, right? So you can either bring the data in an application specific format, or you can bring the data in a standard data format. So from the ability to integrate the data perspective, the goal here is to really minimize that, right? So if we can make all data equal citizens and into a common platform, then we can think about curation, then we can think about transformation, then we can think about delivery. And if the activities all happen within the same platform, then back to my first slide, the ability to have that lineage, the ability to have that provenance, and therefore bring that missing piece, which is the context, to go with the information. And therefore you're feeding the knowledge that is necessary to really take this up the chain in terms of AI and ML is what the platform is trying to deliver. So how does it look technically? And what is in it for particularly the right side of the members picture that I showed you, the suppliers members, including Schlumberger in that space. Why are they contributing and how can they benefit from it, right? So obviously the operators are the final beneficiaries in terms of deployment and executing with the platform. But from a development side, what we said is let's try to identify a clear separation between what would be the compete areas where the participants can now try to differentiate their solutions and go after the marketplace with their unique jewels, if you will, versus the areas that we should really agree and align on as the aspects that we should be working together. And that's what you see here in this picture. So everything that is shown in the dark blue is effectively the OSDU data platform and the architectural components at a high level for the data platform. And what you see up in the light blue space is really the compute area. So for example, Schlumberger, our cloud-based cognitive EMP environment is Delphi. So that's something that fits into the blue space. But we want to make sure that the data that is coming into the application can come from all sources. The data within the process within the application can be made available to downstream workflows. And therefore, using a platform like OSDU makes a lot of sense. Now, what you see is with all of the different suppliers, it's the same thing, whether they are coming at it from an ISV angle, where they may be looking at applications or software services, or systems integrators who may be looking at application or system or enterprise-wide integration of this platform to other sources and applications. This gives them the ability to make sure that they have a way to make a business out of working in an open source space. And this is absolutely important because a lot of times what happens is, you may have a standards body, and if you're really driving this from a volunteer perspective, if the participating companies are not able to see an upside potential, and particularly in today's marketplace, I don't even need to emphasize this too much. Everybody understands the sort of resource constraints that we are operating in. It's absolutely important to build a ecosystem where people can see a commercial potential by participating in the system actively. So that's what we've done here. So I talked about the ingestion and how you can connect it to different sources. The bulk of the services is within the box that says data platform services. The cloud providers are really helping us with respect to the infrastructure level platform services, and also helping us with the deployment, the operational readiness, the cybersecurity, all of the aspects that comes into play when you talk about deploying a solution in the cloud and protecting your data, your IP, your investment in there. So information security, end-to-end support and management. The pieces that you see on the left side are really related to in-country. So a lot of the operators have international presence. We know that a public cloud infrastructure isn't fully ubiquitous across the globe yet. And there may also be considerations for data residency or connectivity to the cloud. So there's reason why we should also be thinking about the same kind of accessibility of the data platform when it comes to in-country as well. So that's a room for improvement. That is part of our vision. It is something that we are continuing to work on. So in terms of deliveries, what we've done so far is, we made a R1 sort of a free version 1 release, if you will. Earlier last year, end of last year, we made the first release based on the code foundation that came from Schlumberger. That's our R2 release. And then we set up a organization, and this was the point where we started to see the explosive growth of the forum itself. So we set up an organization to really put us in a high productivity mode, where we can start to balance what we need to do from an agility perspective, where all these members are sort of nipping at the heels to build new capability and drive the platform, to what is necessary from a governance and standards and checkpoint perspective. So the platform hangs together, and we are working towards one cohesive platform. So that organization is what I'm showing you here with the release that we are working on, and then going forward. So the 160 odd companies that I talked about, each one of them are part of the top box that you see as the the OSDU consortium, if you will, and they all nominate a person that acts as a focal point for their company. And then out of the focal points, there is an election where they select a few people within a management umbrella, which is the OSDU Management Committee. And what you can see here, again, to make sure that there is proper representation across. So you see that there are ISVs like Schlumberger and Teradata and so on. You also see infrastructure providers like Microsoft and Google. And you also see operators like Shell and Chevron and so on. So the idea is to have a good representative mix of these elected people that are able to volunteer the time, and they are able to help define and evolve the vision and the strategy for OSDU itself. And then down below, you see two big blocks, the one that's called OSDU PMC, and I play the role of the PMC lead for OSDU, if you will. And then on the right side, you see these notion of OSDU subcommittees. And like I said, this is really about balancing the needs between standards and governance, which is what you see on the right side under the subcommittees, versus the agility and the meritocracy and allowing people to quickly develop and deliver capabilities, which is really on the PMC. So in effect, my responsibility in the open group organization is to really work with the subcommittees, understand what they are trying to do with respect to setting the standards, and then work with the contributors that we have within the project teams to then translate this to working code that we can deploy and we can operate successfully. And if there is any issues around the strategy or the resources, of course, the management committee plays a role. So that's the sort of the right balance between agility and governance that we have put in place, and the management committees is really in support of how we are working with the R3 release. So even though R3 is not fully out yet, R2 has been deployed by a lot of customers, and with R3 the scope is increasing. So there's a lot of benefits that people are already starting to see, and this is going to get amplified as we start making more and more continuous releases over time. So like I said, the first thing that it does is to really lower the bar, if you will, in terms of entry for suppliers. So whether you are writing a small microservice or you have a full cognitive cloud environment that you want to bring in, the platform has the ability to support all of those workflows. So, big and small, you have a role that you can play in here. It also avoids the amount of customizations or fragmented work that the different teams need to do in the data space. So what that does is it allows the overall maintenance cost or the customization costs to go down. So certainly the operators benefit from it, but also the suppliers benefit from it, because instead of worrying about every last bit of code or every last bit of deployment or operations concern from a supplier perspective, they can start to focus more of their energy towards the differentiating bits that you saw in the architecture space, rather than just the infrastructure and the plumbing space, right? So it's effectively channeling the industry's energy towards the value-added pieces rather than the must-have foundational pieces, if you will. So that's really talking towards the differentiation and how the SIs and the ISVs are able to channel their energy. And what that also means as a benefit for the industry is that when it comes to specializing the technology, looking at product innovation, looking at new capabilities like connectivity to an IoT, or looking at AI, looking at ML, these type of capabilities, the platform is finally freeing you up to look at those innovations and bring them into the industry at a much faster pace and in a much more efficient manner than what we've done before. So that in short is what is OSDU, how does it look like, who the players are, and so on. So one pitch from Stephen and I to you all is, you should really sort of grab this opportunity. We want to see the members that are attending who are not already part of OSDU to be part of this journey. So please get involved. You know, you can play a role either in the technical side of things in terms of implementation, or you can play a role in the business or the standard side of things with respect to the subcommittees. If you are a developer, if you want to contribute code, we welcome you with open arms here. So if you want to join a project team and help, you know, solve the problems to realize the standards, great. That's a good opportunity for you to be able to do it. It's like I said, 160 companies and a vast number of experts coming in together is a great opportunity. So if you are, you know, maybe new to the industry and you're looking for an opportunity to learn and grow, again, it's a great opportunity for you to be able to do that. And of course, you know, anything that you want to do in the code writing or editing or testing or developing the certification criteria, if you come from an IT background, you are more than welcome to contribute. And last but not the least, you know, you can certainly participate in the marketplace. So I know a lot of the AAPG members are also ISVs and software integrators, systems integrators. So again, the other possibility is to really, you know, adopt the OSDU standards, make sure that your application can speak the OSDU lingo, can integrate with OSDU. And the OSDU marketplace could be a great way to reach more customers than what you could do before. So with that, I'll maybe stop, and you know, we could either do questions now or later, whichever way you prefer, Susan.
Well, thank you, Raj. This was great, and I know there will be a lot of questions, but let's wait till the end so we can kind of synthesize them. So I want to really thank you for a very, very thorough and overview and inspiring toward the end. So our next presenter is John Pantano. And this is interesting as well, talking about patents. Can I write or file my own patent or even become a patent agent? So thank you and welcome.
Thanks, Susan. Susan and Ursula Hams and myself were discussing some things, and we were chatting about, you know, how long was it going to be for the business to rebound. And one of the things that I found out through my long career was the importance of intellectual property. So I was an individual contributor and a researcher at ARCO BP, Aramco. I'm a private consultant now, trying to do some innovative stuff, both in environmental and in E&P. And so it was interesting to see, just like the previous speaker was talking about, different standards that I've seen established throughout the 40 years I've been around for exploration data. I've also seen different concepts about intellectual property. Some organizations would say, oh, it's going to cost us $10,000 to $20,000 to do a patent, and you know, it's only going to be for a good idea that we'll do it. And then there was other times in the companies that it was like, we have to make defensive patents. So we're never going to make money out of these patents, but we want the freedom to operate, that somebody else doesn't come along and say we're infringing upon their intellectual property. So I'm not a lawyer. I've been in too many meetings with lawyers to want to be a lawyer. And what I found out was, for patenting, you don't have to have gone to law school. You can patent it yourself. A lot of the people that actually are the patent examiners, this is the center thing, that you can basically become a patent examiner and just engineers and scientists can apply. I'll show you later on that they need a lot of examiners in the government because there are so many applications that have to be decided if they'll be granted or modified or whatnot. But then there was something that I was really surprised when I was writing my own patent, was I found out that for about $500 you could get prepped for a test, take a test, and then you could start to write other people's patents. And so I'll talk a little bit about each one of those aspects. So the very first thing was I was kind of transitioning from oil and gas to environmental to oil and gas. And while I was on one of my sabbaticals, I decided to write up a couple of patents. And of course, I called up patent lawyers. And of course, the patent lawyers say, well, there's a conflict of interest because we represent Schlumberger, we represent Halliburton, we represent Chevron or Texaco. So it was like, well, if everybody's conflicted, how do I get my idea done? And basically it was, well, it's really easy. You go back, you spend 40 bucks on this book, and this book will tell you how to get through the whole process. And I was really amazed because this book, and I'm sure there's plenty like it right now, make it very, very straightforward. You talk about a cookie cutter recipe approach. It's not at all rocket science. It's very straightforward. If you have the imagination to be a geologist or a geophysicist, you can actually do the patenting yourself. So basically, when I was writing these patents, I said to myself, am I ever going to make any money on it? And it was probably not. Is it going to be a way to showcase my talent or some of my knowledge? And I said, yes. So I really developed these patent applications more like a journal article. But besides the journal article, I would show how you actually apply these techniques. So it was really critical that you got to know what the prior art was. And so what was fantastic was Google Patents. It's the best thing in the world. So this is an example test screen. I just put in geology, porosity, cement, and saturations. And you can start to see these are some pretty interesting titles. One of the things is Google Patent even translate the Chinese and Japanese patents so you can actually read those. When I was doing mine, I had to have my friends translate the Chinese patents, but now you can actually get the Chinese patents actually translated. So before you decide that you want to become a patent examiner or a patent agent, while you're trying to patent an idea for yourself, you can start to read all of these different types of patents. I have a good friend who he'd rather poke his eye out than read a patent because they really are written quite different than a journal article. So you really have to see, is this something for you? And can you follow this recipe of how to actually write an application? And once you write an application, you have to go through the process of getting it approved. Now, one of the things is there's so many patent applications going in, these people have learned how to kind of make it hard for you to try to get your patent approved. So what always happens is they say, we are not going to allow you to have any of your claims. Thank you. So you have to write a letter back and say, well, I disagree. You should allow my claims. And after 3 or 4 iterations of going back and forth, you'll get some claims approved. The patent examiners actually by law have to help people like us come up with what are claims that would be inside of our application. So just to show you the kind of reason why there needs to be more patent examiners and more patent agents is this is from 2017. Over 1 million patents were filed in China. About 300,000 patent applications were filed in the US. These are the number of patents that were granted per fiscal year. Now granted, I got my patents in 2015 and 2016, but I actually filed them in 2010 or 2011. So there is an offset that you're going to see a lot more patents being granted here because I didn't include that, but the number of patent applications have been going up with each year. So, and really in terms of closing, this is how you can become a patent agent. So this is almost like being a patent lawyer, except for you can't, if somebody starts to do litigations about patents, you can't do it, but you can write the applications and you can prosecute the applications. And so basically, sorry about that. If you have a bachelor degree in any one of these, if it says that you got a BS in geological engineering, that automatically allows you to sit for the test. The other way to do it is a bachelor degree in other subjects, and then you just show that you have 8 semesters of chemistry, or they're inside of this, it will tell you what sort of classes you have to have. But basically, if you just do a search for exams to do the patent exam, they run anywhere from $300 or free to $500. And basically with that, you might be able to have a second career as we wait for the oil prices to come back. So it was kind of quick that I went through that, just because I am not an expert in this. This is just one person who's gone on a journey and seen the view from several different points of view, and I'd be willing to answer any questions at the end and or direct you to resources that I have found useful.
Okay, this is great. I definitely have some questions, but we'll wait toward the end.
Good, Susan. I figured you would have a few.
I do. Great. Well, thank you. So our next presenter is Alec Walker, and he's going to talk about Python and if it's potentially dangerous. Basically thinking about open is using, the question really is open, using open types of data or software, can it be dangerous? And then also talking about data security and also data integrity. So Alec, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me on. Yeah, that topic, I think there's kind of two parts to it. One is about open source, and if you're using, say, as a client, if you're using a tool that was developed from an open source community, does that have something to do with inherently something to do with an increase in security risk? And the short answer to that is no, it doesn't. It's a separate topic, and we can explore that. And then the second issue is it's about your own data generally. Whether you're in a position to use software that was created by a vendor, or maybe you're a supplier yourself. You're some kind of software vendor. To what extent should you share openly your own data, your own information, whether it's your information about your wells or things like that, or whether it's information like your source code if you're a vendor. And that's a separate topic. We can kind of do one then the other. I didn't make any slides. I hope that's okay. I'm just going to kind of talk here. So on that first topic about open source, I think there's traditionally there are two ways to determine whether software that you're considering using some third-party vendor is secure or not. And the first way is you can look at how it's kind of grandfathered. Some companies are Microsoft certified partners, and maybe their product is built entirely inside of Azure. And as a result, if there's some kind of data breach, then that's actually on Microsoft, not on the software vendor. So that's great for small companies, because they can get set up and not have to be specialists in data security or security generally online in order to make a product that's then viable for even large corporations to use, because they can just kind of piggyback. They can rely on Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure or something like that to kind of take care of that part for them. A lot of startups, a lot of small software vendors will nonetheless have some kind of insurance. And if you're a vendor, it's not that hard to get that. It's pretty cheap, actually, and it'll cover large amounts. If somehow you wind up getting sued for a data breach or something, and it really is your fault, then this kind of insurance is there for you. So some elect to have that as kind of an extra safeguard. But my recommendation otherwise is to just get with one of these great big tech companies and get inside of their system, and then stay under their umbrella and offer your services through them separately. And the second way, I think, traditionally to check on the security, data security of a software vendor is to just have them audited, or look and see whether they already were audited. And it's not like, getting audited, for your personal tax returns or something like that. Being audited is a good thing in this case. Like if a vendor has been audited, probably it's because they elected to be audited, or, they've gone through that process with some kind of big client. And then you can check on that and then, see how it works. And both of those things that I just said don't really have very much to do so much with open source. And so where does open source fit in, and what's that about? So the definition of open source just means, well, maybe you ask different people, you hear different things, but if you just kind of research it and, see the big names that are doing it, what they tend to agree that it means is that the software in question is developed by a community of anonymous or otherwise contributors who might or might not even work for the organization that, is responsible for this software at the end of the day. And the reason why I think that has little or nothing to do with the security is you can really argue both ways. You could say, hey, because it's open source, you have these random people who have access to the source code. But that doesn't mean that they, you can create a way to encrypt something. And just because people know what encryption method was used doesn't mean that they know inherently how to hack into it once it's been implemented. If people have access to it anonymously in large groups, if somebody tries to build a backdoor in, it's more likely that they're caught, doing that. And as a result, they're less likely to even try to do that in the community that's trying to develop that software to begin with. You can kind of argue it both ways, and that's why I think it's not really an indicator. It's not a good indicator anyway. Something that's disappointing to me is I've seen a lot in traditional industries of resistance to open source and resistance to adoption of technology or software products, services, tools developed from open source providers. So the clients are worried somehow that because the tool in question was developed from an open source community, then it's somehow less, inherently it's less safe. And maybe I can share my screen here. I have an idea of something to show. Just click on this. Yeah, let me just search that. Okay, so so here's some, I can send this link out, but here's some interesting videos from PyCon and PyData about how to find software vendors, software as a service vendors, and what you might expect when you do. Also, if I just go to PyCon, so this is like the main Python conference, and I just scroll down here, I'm sure there's somewhere, yeah, here's sponsors. So, Microsoft, Facebook, Capital One, Bloomberg, these are big name company, Pokemon company, big name companies here from all kinds of industries are supporting Python. And they're putting their name behind this open source conference here. Oops, suddenly I'm thinking that my screen is not shared. Double check here that it is. Sorry, I hope I'm not wasting people's time. Oh yeah, it looks like I'm sharing my screen, okay. Yeah, and so, yeah, thanks. Yeah, you gotta ask yourself, like, are all these great big companies, with quite a lot to lose, are they all being duped, because this thing is open source? They're all using this tool, they're all using tools like this. Are they all, missing something, and should they be more wary? It seems unlikely, right? An example of how open source can be a wonderful thing and drive really productive change is in Google's TensorFlow, the very first TensorFlow they set up. So this is something that has to do with creating neural nets. and processing large amounts of data and trying to make that endeavor more generally available to users around the world. The community that emerged using an alternative that was more open sourced did such a good job that Google just kind of adopted that Keras into their latest TensorFlow, and that's like the standard now. So, that kind of thing happens a lot. Another great success story, I guess, I thought I saw the name, is Red Hat down here. So, a bunch of people working on how to make software more generally available and make great software for people. And what's interesting about it is that they made quite a lot of money too, this organization. So the source code is completely open and available to everybody for free. And people can contribute to it and work on it and push latest versions and that sort of thing. So the way that they make their money isn't from actually selling the software, but is actually from providing the training and then the customer service to those who are using the software. And so you see like these alternative business models kind of emerge from open source. And let's see, other things to say about open source. I think it was like 10 years ago, maybe even a little bit more, there was this like a study that was published. I wrote down the name of the group here. Maybe I didn't. Oh yeah, I did. It's the Standish Group. You could probably look that up. The Standish Group published some research report after having done research for 5 years on open source and what impact it had already. And they published this 10 years ago. So we're really looking kind of far back in early days of open source. And they concluded that there was a net impact from the vendor community of like $60 billion annually. That's $60 billion less earned by software vendors and $60 billion, saved per year would otherwise have been spent from the standpoint of the clients. So, if you're representing a client and you're considering open source solutions, hey, it might be kind of a good thing for you generally that this exists. Talking from my own experience, I guess I'm on here representing Dolphin. We make software for oil and gas. Our software that we create is not open source. And the reason why it's not is because what we build is so use case specific. In every instance, we're using our core capacity and IP to build out something that is useful to a specific use case for a client. And as a result, it's kind of theirs as much as ours once we've built it for them. And then we have to take the next thing and go on to the next client. And works okay for us. So there are probably a lot of vendors in that sort of position. So it's not for everybody, but I'm happy it exists. I use Python all the time, and it's fantastic what it can do. So many libraries developed by tons of people in all kinds of niches throughout all kinds of industries. Let's see, so we talked about the first part. On the second part, I get less kind of generally researched and more opinionated from my own personal experience. So I'm speaking perhaps less from a standpoint of a true expert and more from just like, hey, this is Alec talking off the cuff about what he thinks is right. And that second topic that I introduced at the beginning is about like, should you be sharing your data? And I think generally what I found to be true, having worked in oil and gas as a consultant, helping oil majors and other big independent players, having worked as a consultant in an oil major, helping other companies and moving downstream and upstream and different countries. And it's not like I have a huge amount of experience compared to quite a few in the oil and gas industry. What I did notice in the experience that I have is that the engineers who are working on projects in communities where the tendency is for more data sharing, like say, Colorado or Canada, tend to be faster at gathering and analyzing data and tend to be able to make more informed decisions more quickly, which just kind of makes sense, right? If you have access to it, and probably your workflows are including things like how you pull in the information that you need, versus in places where the tendency is not to share so much data, it's harder for people to make decisions, and fewer people are good at doing it as a result. So, I guess if you have a really big competitive advantage and have all of the data, maybe you can hold on to that competitive advantage. But I think the goal of trying to be that, at least in Houston, sometimes is a little counterproductive. The goal of trying to be the one who controls a lot of data and doesn't give access to it as much. So I really like this open subsurface data universe and what it stands for, and I think that's a great step in a great direction, a big step in a great direction. Let's see, anything else to say about that? If you are, or maybe I'll give another, just a couple examples to try to flesh out my strong opinion on this. I can't mention names, but some organizations are very, very careful about data not being shared, and that's true across the board. And it's just kind of like it doesn't matter the situation. Just data cannot be shared outside of the organization. And then if there is a need that arises where we need some kind of third party to come in and help get something done, there's a lot of red tape, and it can take a really, really long time. And our industry generally is kind of missed for that, right? And a lot of organizations that might want to help the industry wind up moving away and helping other industries instead because of that, that reputation. And I think that what happened in the industry, maybe historically, is at some point when IT has its own entity inside of a big organization, maybe a large independent operator in oil and gas, or else an oil major is getting set up. Typically, the incentive structure is IT is a guardian. IT is in big trouble if there's a data breach, because some data is really valuable and shouldn't, be shared. And IT typically doesn't have the same experience on the operational side that a lot of the other departments do have. So IT is not necessarily the best organization to figure out inside the company what data really is very sensitive and should not be shared. What did we spend on that pump or something, versus like the fact that there is a compressor in a refinery. Of course, there's a compressor. There's a compressor in every refinery, something like that. So all of the data is meant to be totally safe and secured. And IT is very careful to make sure that happens, because they don't have much to gain incentive structure wise if there's a big boost in productivity or efficiency on the operational side, but they have everything to lose if there's a data breach. And what I've seen happen typically is like, imagine some budget controlling decision maker deciding to use third-party consulting or third-party software, and they talk to the lawyers, the general counsel, and the lawyers say, okay, this is potentially risky, and we want you to be aware of the risks. And they might even say, and we recommend that you don't pursue it. But the budget controller typically can say, okay, I hear you, thank you, I'm going to do it anyway. But if IT comes along and says, we don't think this is a good idea, it's not even phrased that way. IT can just come in and steamroll, the whole thing and say, no way, this shall not happen. And they have that power in the organization generally. And I wonder if that's starting to change, but I think that's partly why it's held up. And it's the incentive structure. It's not the people. There's wonderful people across the organization. It's just that if it's a cost center, then it's not participating in the upside. Therefore, it's a guardian. So I think that's kind of holding back the industry, and I think it's holding back a lot of the bigger players in the industry. And I see the difference when I go to other places and work with other kinds of companies. So that's more opinion, and sorry if people disagree. Please feel free to write questions or other comments, and we can try to round out that an opinion if I've missed something. I'm less of an expert there, and I'm just talking off the cuff from my own experience.
Well, this is great, and you've definitely inspired some questions. So, and I like the way that you brought everything together and kind of put it into the big picture, which is our theme for today. So why don't I go ahead and address the questions that are in the Q&A, and I'm going to go ahead and address two that have been already answered because I think that they're quite interesting for everyone. So this question is from David Leary, and he said, for Raj, for an academic organization, DDE of IUGS, how do we access standards and promulgate the standards for our efforts? Do all these researchers or universities need to join OSDU? So I like that question. It applies to a lot of different similar endeavors.
Yeah, so like I said, there's two portions to it, right? There is the standards definition part of it, and that requires a membership to the OSDU forum. But if you want to be a freelance contributor and you want to participate in the community space, if you go to community.opengroup.org/OSDU, the code is all there. You can request yourself to be added as a contributor to any of these projects. You can download the code. You can submit pull requests for us to look at. So it's as open as you need it to be.
So some of the things that one might want to do, for example, I might have an app that goes in and creates certain types of, certain types of relationships with the data. Could I do something like that and then make that app available to everybody that's just basically sitting on top of the OSDU platform?
Yeah, so you can bring in connectors if you're trying to bring data into the OSDU platform, or if you're doing additional what we call enrichment, data transformation, value add type of services, you can do that as well. Again, you define the scope that in which you want to work on, and I would encourage the team to look at what the current scope is, what the services are. Review the projects under the governance page that you will find, and pick out where you think you can contribute best.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so that pretty much answers Diana's question too. She was wondering how to become a contributor. And then she wants to know, just to clarify, does she have to be, can she be an individual? Does she have to be associated with one of the participant companies?
Yeah, same answer as before. Yeah, so if you want to contribute towards the code development side of things, that's in the community space. You can do that. If you want to participate in the definition of the standards itself, then you need to be a member and part of the OSDU consortium.
But I can do it as an individual. I don't have to be part of a company.
Oh yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's see. Let's see if we have any questions for, okay, here's another one. Here's one for Alec. Alec, in your opinion, what is the best way to pay back to the open source communities? By active contributors, promoting tools, donations, for example, to python.org, etc.?
Yeah, I think that's a really cool question, and thanks for the generous thought. I'm not saying thanks on behalf of myself, but from the open source community. I wish I did more. I think there's two things that really help. One is to give recognition to whatever part of the product that you're using that you love, because then that'll filter down to whoever created it. And often people are working on open source stuff to kind of boost their own resumes. There are a lot of people who are getting better at software through contributing to open source communities, with the goal of then being able to say, hey, look what I did, look what I helped to build. And it's a sense of community, but it's also like a path towards some sort of career. And maybe they're already working on something and are doing it on their free time. But helping those people get recognition is great. The second thing is, you can contribute yourself, and that's kind of fun. Just hop on and, think of something that you'd like to add on top of something that already has some growth, whether it's like a Red Hat community or a Python community or whichever one you like. And Python for geoscience, that's burgeoning. Python for petroleum engineering. Even though the industry is dealing with some tough times, there are tons of libraries, and so getting involved there. Donating, yeah, I suppose. I always feel like if you just donate generally, it's hard to know where it goes and how it's helpful. Which doesn't mean it isn't a good idea. I just that tends to be what people do, and that's great. There's probably always a need for more of that, but I like those other two ideas as well.
Excellent. Okay, so I've got a question for.
Can I add one thing to what Alec said, though?
Sure.
Python Underground is a fantastic organization if you're a geoscientist, whether you're a geologist, geochemist, geophysicist, to participate in. And they actually help people contribute to the open source community. So it's Python Underground.
Oh, thanks, John. I was going to have a next question for you and Stephen. Okay, so let's say that I develop some code and that works within a framework of OSDU. Can I patent it?
Well, so yes and no, depends upon where you put it. So this is Stephen answering. If you contribute it directly into the open source space, everything that is contributed is under an Apache 2 license, right? Which means, yes, you can patent it, but what would happen is you would grant the patent rights to the open group so that it could, because the Apache 2 license would prevail. Right?
Okay.
If you were working outside of the platform, as in connecting an application to it and leveraging the services that are inside of it and the data that's inside of it, but not contributing it directly, then yes, you could patent it and actually maintain the rights.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, so I have a patent question for you, John, and one for Sanjiv. Okay, so let's say that I have a new type of personal protection equipment, some new gloves, and they have some unique special ability to kind of like be like repel tar and all sorts of things. I'm thinking, La Brea tar pit or whatever type of well, I don't know where that thought came from, but anyway. And so since I have some really unique personal protection equipment that I've developed, is it very easy to patent that?
So yeah, you would just really do a patent search, see what's already been patented because it has to be unique and it has to be useful. And then do a provisional patent, which if you're a micro entity, it's $25 or $50 or $75. It's a nominal amount of money. That will then give you a year to then start to figure out what your claims are going to be. And during that year, you can have discussions that won't sacrifice your rights. And so you really need to read the rules much better. But there is a whole process that you can protect yourself, then you can start to have discussions, and then you can go to one of these manufacturers and actually see if they want to have a discussion. Oil companies, for instance, won't talk to you until you get the patent granted or the patent actually published. So you can apply for an application. It will take a year before it gets published. So each one of the industries will have a different timeline for you to go. And the other gentleman can probably talk about on the receiving end what's going on.
Yeah, so for example, Sanjiv, so let's say that I have some new gloves and they have unique stuff. Can you or Frost help me market them once I think I have a patentable, unique thing?
What Frost does is, there's no short answer to that. We have been able to introduce people to potential partners, and we do partner finding kind of scenarios. And for you to be able to first see whether that is the right product for the market. So you obviously are looking at the product landscape of the market, what the market is like, whether there's a demand for your product as well or not. And if there is, as you were asking about a patent question just a couple of minutes back, PP industry is coming out with so many new products. In fact, we are at this time looking at probably half a dozen new products which are coming into the PP industry. And they are all in the same range where you are looking at new patents. So the short answer is yes, it can be done. So, but there is a whole process how to do that.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. So Mark has a question that's probably on everybody's mind about patents. I know someone who has patents, and then others have taken the patent and used it to make adjacent similar products. How does one protect oneself from this kind of piracy?
Well, it's usually about $1 million to start to do litigation. So if the other person's making $10 million, then you go sue them. If that other person isn't making, you got to get money, right? And it's going to cost you a lot of money. So everybody has this idea that patents are these powerful things. And I think there's so many patents that have been granted that shouldn't be granted, that you can argue that they were never enforceable, the claims. So the ideas inside the application can be really good, but unless the claim is written really well, I don't think it can be enforced as well. But the thing that was most surprising to me is if you get sued for a patent infringement, that means you're making a lot of money, so that's good news. And the other thing is you have to have a lot of money to sue for a patent infringement. But that's just me sitting on the sideline.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Now, I saw that there's an interesting question from, let's see, ETN, and this is an OSDU question. Where are the OSDU data coming from? Is the membership fee annual or lifetime? And 3, are some suppliers' tools, services included or discounted in the membership?
Yeah, so OSDU itself is a software platform, right? So we distribute some reference data to go along with it, but it's really the operator who has the deployment environment where they are populating the data. So it could be their own proprietary data, it could be any licensed or subscription data, or it could be, you know, public data that they can populate into this. So that's to your first question. And then the second question, the membership fee, I believe, is annual. Stephen, correct me if I'm saying something incorrect here.
You're right.
Go ahead, Stephen.
No, you're right. It's an annual fee.
Yeah.
And it's sized by the size of the company that's involved. Very low for academia, more expensive for large companies. Yeah.
And then in terms of suppliers' tools and services, no, that is independent of the membership. The membership is really to the open group OSDU consortium. So the suppliers are equal members in there, but there is a marketplace that is available, and therefore there is an opportunity for suppliers to put in their products in there, and that there is a potential in the future where we can think about you know, discounts or other favorable terms for members.
So does some of the OSDU data, can it come from the open sources, like say from the state sources of repositories?
Correct. So what we are working on now are things like generic ingestion for LAS files or CSV files or SegWi files, you know, the standard formats of data exchange. Mm-hmm. And most of the sites that you talk about, Susan, they typically provide you their information in one of those formats. So certainly that would be a low friction route to getting it into your OSDU instance.
That's interesting. Okay, so let's see what other questions. Anybody else want to just open your mic and ask a question, or? Here's a question: was Python underground or software underground? So this Matthew, are those both places or things? I'm pretty ignorant when it comes to the underground.
I have to admit, even though I'm the one who posted that, it's my first time finding that one as well. I can't remember who came
It
on
was
and mentioned
software underground. You got it right, Alec. Thank you.
I think Python underground sounds scarier though.
I actually did a Google search for Python underground, and the first result was a video that looked kind of scary of a big snake, going after somebody. So software underground is the one you want, yeah.
Okay.
And I think I posted that in the response to John's, I guess it was Diana's question.
Mm-hmm. So here's another question. How easy is it for people to, for example, let's say that 2 or 3 people have different ideas. They've recently been separated, but they want to come up with some new thing that maybe integrates, for example, say seismic, reservoir information, well logs, and something else, maybe outcrop, to make better reservoir characterization or models. Is it very easy for people to team up like that in OSDU?
Roger, or me?
Yeah, go for it, Stephen.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the primary goals of OSDU is to lower the barrier to innovation, right? And as Raj pointed out, a lot of the barriers to innovation is just set up. I need to get the applications together. I need to get the data together. I need to get all these other sorts of things together before I can actually do anything that's kind of interesting. So it is that sort of innovative mindset that is a very target community for everyone. And a lot of this goes back to, eliminating the barriers to getting access to information. And so there's discussions about public data. But frankly, if anybody's gone out and got public data, you understand the burden of getting it into a system, being able to use it, to be able to integrate it, to be able to form it towards a standard structure that you can use it. So that is a primary use case for it. Yeah, Raj, anything to add?
No, that's good, Stephen. Thanks.
That's interesting. So Maitri has mentioned that she loves software underground. And so it might be interesting do you mind talking about it a little bit, Maitri? Oh, she muted? Oh, let me see.
Susan, I'm the one that posted that.
Oh, okay, sorry.
No, that's okay.
I thought Maitri.
No.
Okay.
Back in May, they hosted a conference. It's all up on YouTube. It's called Transform 2020. It was the first time I've ever been really exposed to this kind of open source software. And they're a great community. They have everything up on their Slack channel, which you've got right there, the conversation that you can ask questions, you can grab a hold of whatever's there. It's a great group of people that support each other to be able to learn to code and figure out how to work with all this stuff.
Yeah, this is great. I kind of, sometimes I think that we should probably have courses that are just sort of like, okay, how to use the tools and how best to collaborate. Not just, and where to best find, where are the best repositories to do kind of like accelerated collaborations.
Well, that Transform 2020 actually has everything on YouTube. So if you just sign up to the YouTube channel, there are some, I thought, some really excellent working sessions and also courses that were given.
Oh, cool. Wow, that's great. So I guess the main thing is figuring out what you want to accomplish, what your goal would be, and then sort of just like collaborate and go toward that. I mean, some people frame them as challenges, others frame them as essentially opportunities. So, you know, they're all out there. The key is find out where the opportunities are. We've been talking in these different sessions about critical minerals and other things that, so I don't think, I mean, the question is too, can we use this for things besides oil and gas? Or does it have to be oil and gas information for OSDU?
Yeah, so actually, it's an interesting question. It goes back to Roger's comment about the kind of the tension between standards and agility that are out there, right? So the standards part of the organization is trying to come up with standards that people can use to exchange information in a meaningful way. But those standards themselves are almost by definition, almost by necessity, slow moving, right? Because it represents a consensus of a number of people. The underlying data platform is a schema on read. It honors the producer format, so you can bring any data that you want inside the system. All you have to do is describe it in a way that's discoverable. And what we have found in our company is that there are so many adjacent spaces to the data that you think that you want to work with that can inform it. An example would be, you know, if I'm getting in and taking a look at drilling performance, well, actually equipment management becomes quite important. And yet the equipment management part of it is not part of the OSDU standard, but it's okay. The data platform will accept it from the side. We can integrate it inside the system. We can do all sorts of analysis on top of it. So it can be used effectively for any domain. But kind of my caution is don't try to treat it as an extremely generic platform because it is opinionated around oil and gas. And it's a lot better to sort of extend it into the adjacent spaces than it is to try to go out into some white space someplace.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, because I was thinking, okay, there's a lot of work now that being doing surface work in siting solar panels, solar siting, and also wind, and people work in teams with attorneys and land people, and it's so if there's some way to use it in surface as well as subsurface, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, so actually it's not even an internal debate. It was started with open subsurface data universe, and it's kind of hard to get rid of names. So internally, we're kind of trying to kind of hide the subsurface portion of it. We did want to do it for this presentation because this is a subsurface group
Right.
for the most part. But inside of Schlumberger, it's our upstream system, right? And upstream means surface as well as subsurface, all the way up to facilities. It means measurements, but also means the operations that you perform in the field. It means the supply chain necessary to be able to source the materials, and it means all those sorts of things. And that's the strength of the data platform, right? It allows you to kind of bring data in from all these adjacent spaces and different dimensions and kind of look for answers that you wouldn't before look for, have searched for. But at the same time, the meaningful exchange of information between companies requires some sort of agreement upon what that exchange looks like. And this is where the standard comes in. So it's an interesting open source, open standards project. And it's the first one I've ever been involved in that actually tried to combine both.
That's really cool. Wow. So I just looked at the time. I'm like, I can't believe it. It's already time to go. So this has really been a fantastic session, and it really opens up a lot of doors for the future, and just powerful platforms, powerful tools, and like there's just no limit. The only limit is the limit of your imagination, and tolerance for like hard work. Anyway, so thank you again. I want to thank Sanjiv, Bhaskar, and Stephen Whitley, and Raj Kannan, John Pantano, Alec Walker, And I'd also like to ask Larry Davis if he has a few final words for us, especially with respect to strategic planning, which is his expertise.
Well, I'm going to get into strategic planning. I'm just sitting back in my chair comfortable, being entertained and fascinated by the presentations and that. And I always learned something I hadn't anticipated. That patent presentation, I didn't know it could be that complicated. I thought there were simple things. It's kind of interesting, though, the comments that although you may have a patent, if somebody's infringing on it, it's going to cost all your wealth to challenge it. So that's kind of scary. But anyway, thanks for everybody. And I enjoyed everything I heard tonight. Look forward to next week.
Well, thank you. And I'll just let everybody know that you'll be receiving an email from me. I will post a link to the recording. I'll go ahead and process it and upload it, so you'll have access to the recording. And I'll also send a link so you can sign up for next week's. So we have 20 signed up, or I have 20 envisioned as this series. But I thought I'd take a little break after 20, and which is good timing because our annual convention is coming up. So I just wanted to give a little plug for AAPG's annual convention. We will be featuring interactive panels and also technical sessions on OSDU. And I don't know about patents, but we definitely are talking about digital transformation and to a certain degree, protection, personal protection. So I'll send a link to that too, so you can take a look at the schedule. So thank you again. Really appreciate it. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye. Thank you.
Good night.